Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Scott, for holding this important hearing about the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. I want to also join my colleagues who expressed their opinion, and I agree that it would be very helpful to hear from the Secretary and the Department as we're talking about implementation. I worked on education issues in my home state of Oregon at the local level and then in the state legislature. And it quickly became clear that the real work needed to be done at the federal level. And so at the top of my legislative agenda list when I joined Congress was rewriting No Child Left Behind. And I was thrilled to serve on the committee when we worked on Every Student Succeeds Act and on the conference committee and be there at the bill signing. And it was a great day, and was looking forward to implementation. So needless to say, I was disappointed earlier in the year when the majority, instead of talking about which regulations were problematic and which they could support, instead got rid of all of them through the Congressional Review Act and blocked important regulations related to statewide accountability systems, consolidated plans, and data reporting. And then at the same time, the new administration, left without their implementing regulations, attempted to rush through revised guidance for peer reviewers. Then there was a modified template for state plans and new explanatory documents, and all of this was taking place less than a month before the initial deadline for submitting the plans, and after many states were well on their way to completing their plans. So I don't think we should be surprised that there has been uncertainty and confusion. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. And in fact, without the ESSA regulations, now there's a conversation about which NCLB regulations are still in effect and what do we do about those. So what we really need is for the department to play a reliable role in enforcing compliance with the statutory requirements in the law and clearing up areas of ambiguity and helping states take advantage of the flexibility that's such an important part of the law. And I know in my home state of Oregon, I had conversations as they were working on their plan about the lack of certainty. And they appreciate the flexibility, but don't want to go down a path and then months later be told that you can't go down that path. So, Mr. Lovell, in the department's feedback letter to my state of Oregon, the department noted that Oregon's plan proposed to include, in the students with disabilities subgroup, students who had previously been identified as students with disabilities but had exited that status recently. The department said Oregon cannot use that flexibility, even though it was permitted in the accountability regulations that were finalized when they were writing their plan. So can you describe other instances where states actually lost flexibility because of Congress's action to block important implementing regulations?
Sure. So one area where we lost flexibility, my apologies. So one area where we lost flexibility is in the ability of states to provide credit to their schools where kids are performing above proficiency. Right. So we would like to be able to really prioritize higher order thinking skills, and one way that you could do that is by providing credit for students that are performing above proficiency. The law very specifically says that kids should be that the academic achievement indicator needs to measure proficiency. So it's questionable as to whether you can actually provide credit for students that are performing above proficient. As a result, you have some states, one in particular that I can think of, where they're not measuring proficiency at all, which is also not consistent with the law.
Right.
So I totally agree with you. The removal of the regulation on top of a new template less than 30 days before the applications were due did cause a decent amount of confusion, and I think that that had the regulation been in place, we wouldn't see some of the inconsistencies that we're seeing.
Thank you. And I also want to follow up. We've heard a lot of talk about the importance of stakeholder engagement, and that was a really critical component of the Every Student Succeeds Act. Mr. Lovell, the department's revised template does not include explicit questions about stakeholder engagement, as well as other important requirements of ESSA, including provisions related to homeless and foster youth. And I know you've reviewed the state plans, and how has the department's decision to exclude those statutory requirements affected the development of state plans? And based on your review of state plans, are states actually meeting these requirements of the Every Student Succeeds Act?
So thank you very much for that question. If it's not written, you don't know whether it's happening or not. And so I agree that that especially around some of our most vulnerable kids, our homeless students and our kids in foster care, not having specific questions for those students means that we don't know what is going to be happening. That said, just because it's not in the template doesn't mean that those requirements don't exist. So
Right.
it's very important that we still carry out and oversee the implementation of those provisions, even if the questions were not asked in the template.
Thank you. More need for certainty. And Madam Chairwoman, as I yield back, I want to take just a moment to acknowledge my senior legislative assistant, Adrian Anderson, who has worked with me for several years on this committee, on the Every Student Succeeds Act especially, and he is leaving at the end of the month to go to law school, and I just want to thank him.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici.